Laudetur Jesus Christus. Vatican and World News.
Today, Friday, April 23rd, is the Feast of St. George and the name day of our Holy Father, Pope Francis, Jorge Mario Bergoglio. And these are today's headlines. Pope Francis has celebrated his name day with poor people receiving the COVID-19 vaccine at the Vatican. 3 Haitian priests have been released from captivity after being kidnapped 2 weeks ago. And the Church has beatified 10 martyrs, including a 12-year-old boy, who were killed in Guatemala in the 1980s and early 90s. In the Vatican, I'm Christopher Wells. Our top story today, Pope Francis has made a surprise visit to a group of Rome's poor and homeless people as they receive their second dose of the COVID-19 vaccine at the Vatican. Devin Watkins tells us more.
As he often does on the Feast of St. George, which is Jorge in Spanish, Pope Francis offered something to others for his name day on Friday. This year's was a double gift given to a group of Rome's poor and homeless. The Pope not only threw his support behind the Papal Almoner's project to provide free COVID-19 vaccines for a group of around 600 vulnerable people, but he also showed up in person at the Paul VI Hall on Friday to visit them as they received their second jab. According to the Holy See Press Office, the Pope spent around half an hour with those present. He walked through the audience hall greeting people as he walked along. Before he left, Pope Francis stopped to offer a large chocolate Easter egg which was distributed to the volunteers while respecting all health norms. Those present then sang a song of well wishes for the Pope's name day. As he stopped to speak to several volunteers in a joyous and cordial environment, said the statement, the Holy Father thanked them and encouraged them to continue their hard work. Cardinal Konrad Krajewski, the Papal Almoner, then thanked all the volunteers and health workers in the Pope's name for their part in organizing the vaccination campaign. Those receiving the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine were part of a larger group of 1,400 who got the first jab during Holy Week. The office of the Papal Almoner had already announced on Thursday that the Pope would celebrate his name day with a surprise. It turns out that surprise was a personal visit to Rome's most vulnerable. The group includes several guests of a home run by the Missionaries of Charity, people receiving aid from the Sant'Egidio community, and others helped by a group called Medicina Solidale. The Vatican's campaign to offer free vaccines for those in need began in January, at the same time as Vatican employees started receiving the jab. I'm Devin Watkins.
Meanwhile, Pope Francis, in a message signed by Cardinal Secretary of State Pietro Parolin, has expressed his spiritual closeness to those affected by the eruption of the volcano La Soufrière, which is located in the Caribbean island state of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, situated in the Lesser Antilles. The Pope's thoughts and prayers were addressed in particular to the many displaced persons forced to evacuate their homes and seek shelter from the effects of this disaster, as well as to rescue workers and volunteers. The Pope has entrusted the entire population to the loving providence of Almighty God. The volcano began its latest eruption on April 9th after more than 40 years of inactivity. State authorities have ordered the evacuation of part of St. Vincent Island due to the potentially disastrous scope of the current emergency. Meanwhile, 3 members of the clergy who had been kidnapped in Haiti have been released by their abductors. James Blears reports that there are still captives being held.
12 days ago, 5 priests, 2 nuns, and 3 of their relatives were kidnapped in the town of Croix-le-Bouquet, northeast of the capital, Port-au-Prince. They were on their way to attend the installation of a parish priest. One woman who was ill was released, but it's taken until now for 3 clergy, all Haitian, to be freed. A nun and a priest, both French, are among 6 people still being held. These kidnappings are being blamed on the 400 Mawozo gang. There's a ransom demand for $1 million plus reparations from the French government, who was the colonial power in Haiti until independence in 1803. The kidnappers are insisting these demands must be met, threatening to starve those they're still holding. This is the 3rd day that the Church has suspended all the activities of its institutions throughout Haiti. Masses are being held for those still captive, and church bells are being tolled to focus focus attention on their plight. Haiti's President Jovenel Moïse is vowing to continue efforts until all are released safe and well. The United Nations says that kidnappings in Haiti have risen by 200% in the last year. Haiti, which is the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere, is rapidly descending into lawlessness, so much so that its streets are no longer safe day or night. For Vatican Radio, James Bliss reporting.
In Central America, 3 priests and 7 lay people who were killed for their faith in Guatemala were beatified in the city of Quiché. The Bishop of Quiché, Rosalino Bianchetti, recalled their example of courage and faith in an interview with Vatican News, saying it's a source of inspiration for the people of Guatemala. Father Benedict Mayaki tells us more.
The beatification mass for 10 martyrs of Quiché took place in the Cathedral of Santa Cruz del Quiché, Guatemala on Friday. Among those beatified were 3 priests of the Missionaries of the Sacred Heart, José María Gran Sirera, Juan Alonso Fernandez, and Faustino Villanueva. Alongside them were 7 lay persons, Rosalio Benito, Reyes Us, Domingo del Barrio, Nicolás Castro, Tomás Ramírez, Miguel Tiu, and 12-year-old Juan Barrera Mendez. All 10 of them were killed in hatred of the faith in Guatemala between 1980 and 1991. In an interview with Vatican News, Bishop Rosolino Bianchetti Bofelli of Quiché Diocese recalled the lives of the 10 martyrs against the backdrop of the history of the country. He said that the martyrs were truly missionaries on the move, going from house to house, keeping the faith alive and evangelizing. He said that in spite of threats, they embraced their cross and were persecuted and eventually killed by those who considered the teachings of the gospel a danger to the interests of the powerful. Between 1960 and 1996, Guatemala struggled through a conflict between its military regime and various leftist groups, during which time over 200,000 people were killed. Around the 1980s, the church began to undergo systematic persecution for its role in the defense of the dignity and rights of the poor. Speaking on the significance of the beatification of the martyrs for the church in Guatemala, Bishop Bianchetti pointed out that it is the culmination of a long journey that Jesus called these men to undertake. He noted that for the people, the beatification is a sign to be enthusiastic and to become more passionate in following Jesus while preserving the torch of faith left behind by the martyrs. Bishop Bianchetti went on to hail the example of Juan Barrera Mendez, also known as Juanito, who, though being only 12 years of age, showed deep spiritual maturity and courage in his sacrifice for the faith. He went on to highlight that the example of the martyrs is a source of inspiration for the communities in Guatemala today as they face the challenges of our time, including poverty, unemployment, exploitation, and forced migration. He also highlighted that the church in Quiché is working humbly but with much hope, hand in hand with the martyrs, to build the kingdom of God. I'm Father Benedict Mayaki.
Elsewhere, yet another tragedy has struck in the Mediterranean as migrants continue to attempt the dangerous crossing from North Africa to Europe. Hopes are fading in the search for survivors of a migrant boat carrying 130 people that capsized off the coast of Libya. Nathan Morley has this report.
10 bodies were spotted near a capsized rubber boat off the coast of Libya on Thursday, which had around 130 people on board. The European humanitarian group SOS Mediterranee said it was alerted to the presence of 3 boats in distress in international waters off Libya. The NGO's Ocean Viking ship, as well as merchant vessels, headed to the area in difficult conditions, where waves measured 6 meters high. Yanis Yernok from SOS Mediterranee told Vatican Radio the situation was dire.
Yes, what happened yesterday really was a race against time. We witnessed the aftermath of a terrible shipwreck with, probably around 130 deaths. Throughout the last days, the weather actually was pretty bad, with waves up to 6 meters.
With the political situation continuing to be unstable in Libya, it's expected that more migrants will attempt to cross the Mediterranean in the coming months.
We see that clearly the situation in Libya is not improving throughout the last years. The political situation is extremely unstable. The situation for migrants and asylum seekers on the ground in Libya is fragile. So we can expect actually that people will continue and be forced to flee these catastrophic situation and circumstances, that is for sure.
SOS Mediterranee is a humanitarian organisation founded by European citizens who chartered a rescue vessel in order to save people in distress in the Mediterranean region, which is the most deadly migration route in the world.
The ocean Viking, our rescue ship, is completely financed by donations, mainly private donations, and we actually still need to continue to raise funds in order to continue our missions throughout the year.
Over 450 migrants have perished in the Mediterranean so far this year, according to the International Organization on Migration. Most were attempting to reach Europe from Tunisia or Libya. Just last week, the United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, and the International Organization for Migration said that at least 41 people, including a child, died after a boat carrying African migrants to Europe sank off Tunisia. For Vatican Radio, this is Nathan Morley reporting.
Finally, makeshift community pantries are popping up across the Philippines after the country's bishops called on people to support efforts in the capital, Manila, to help the poor during the coronavirus pandemic. The call came after the first such stall was set up by a woman in Manila last week and began replicating across the nation. Robin Gomes has this report.
Makeshift community pantries are popping up across the Philippines after the country's Catholic bishops called on the people to support the effort in the capital, Manila, to help the poor during the coronavirus pandemic. The call came after the first such stall set up by a woman in Manila last week began replicating across the nation. We are happy to know that in recent days, neighborhoods and communities across the country have organized themselves to help needy families, especially with food and other basic necessities, Archbishop Romulo Valles of Davao, the president of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines, CBCP, said on April the 21st. He said it was proof of the people's care for each other. The idea caught up after Anne Patricia Non set up a small pantry on April the 14th in Quezon City and called on people to give according to their ability and take what they need. At least 80 community pantries have already been set up in various places in Metro Manila and more than 300 others across the country. The motto of the community pantries is, share what you can, take what you need. It is not charity but mutual help, explained CBCP Vice President Bishop Pablo Virgilio David of Caloocan. We are responsible for one another, following the example of the first Christian communities, he told Vatican Fides News Agency. Bishop Jose Colin Bagaforo of Kidapawan, National Director of Caritas Philippines, also encouraged the community pantry, saying they prove that communities can serve as first responders to address hunger and food insecurities. In April 2020, Caritas Philippines launched Kindness Stations, a national program aimed at advocating community-based response that empowers members of the community to take what you need, spare some for others, and give what you can. Bishop Bagaforo encouraged all local organizations to continue, open, or reactivate Caritas Kindness Stations in support of the community pantries nationwide. I am Robin Gomes.
And that brings us to the end of this edition of Vatican and World News. For more on these and other stories, we invite you to visit our web portal at www.vaticannews.va. You can also follow us on our Facebook page and on our Twitter account. Many thanks this afternoon go to our producers and to our technicians in studio. In the Vatican, I'm Christopher Wells.